The stone felt alive beneath her hands. Elara was a geologist, trained to trust instruments and data. But here, on this remote survey, nothing in her textbooks explained the warmth pulsing through the granite. A faint, rhythmic hum vibrated up her arms, a secret song from deep within the planet. Her colleagues wrote off the anomalous energy readings as faulty equipment, but she knew it was real. To pursue it meant risking her career and her credibility, all for a truth that science refused to see. By staying with this story, you will uncover the hidden world of energy flowing beneath our feet and the fragile balance that keeps our planet alive. What happens when a single curious mind uncovers a secret that could save the world or break it? What would you risk to learn a truth everyone else ignores? She altered the survey coordinates with a geologist's precision, steering the team's instruments toward stable, unremarkable rock. It was a small date, a point in a vast wilderness, a lie of a mission that felt like a betrayal of her training. Yet when dusk painted the sky in deep purples and golds, she found herself back at the granite outcrop, her personal resonance scanner humming in her hands. The device was her own design, calibrated to read energy signatures, not just mineral density. As she swept it across the warm stone, its screen flickered, tracing lines of brilliant gold that branched and wove like roots through the bedrock. It was a map of a hidden world. Then the scanner screamed. A flash of searing white light erupted from its core, and a high-pitched whine tore through the silent evening, a digital shriek echoing across the valley. Shadows detached themselves from the trees. Her team leader's voice crackled over the radio, demanding an explanation for the energy spike. Before she could form a reply, an older man stepped into the clearing. His name was Kale, and his eyes held the weight of the mountains themselves. He did not look like a trespasser. He looked like the land. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. The professional protocol was clear. Report the unauthorized individual, secure the site, retreat. But the scanner's dying readout and the profound stillness in Kale's gaze held her in place. She lowered the radio, her choice made. "You do not poke a sleeping giant with a sharp stick," Kale said, his voice a low rumble. "You have struck a nerve in the world's living body. This energy is not a resource to be mapped. It is a flow to be respected, a lattice of light that holds the earth in balance. Your machine has agitated it." As if on cue, the ground beneath them shuddered. It was not a violent quake, but a deep, uneasy groan, as if the planet itself had flinched in its sleep. The tremor was a direct and terrifying answer to her intrusion, a warning written in the very bones of the world. Silence stretched between them, thick with the memory of the tremor. Kale studied her, his gaze weighing her fear against her stubborn curiosity. Then he turned without a word, gesturing for her to follow. He led her to a fissure in the granite, hidden behind a curtain of hanging moss. The air that sighed from the opening was warm and carried a scent of ozone and old stone. Inside, the darkness was not absolute. Faint, shimmering lines of gold pulsed within the rock walls, illuminating a chamber covered in ancient carvings. These were not random scratches. They depicted a vast, branching network of light flowing beneath mountains and seas, a luminous map of the world's hidden veins. Other images showed towering cities of crystal, and then their terrifying collapse as jagged cracks split the lattice, the land above turning to dust. This was a historical record, a warning carved in stone. Kale placed a hand on a section of the wall where the golden light flickered erratically. A hairline crack was leaking a visible strand of energy, a brilliant, restless tendril that spat and hissed like a live wire. The stone around it was crumbling. He began to press specific stones back into place, his movements practiced and reverent. He needs my help. The thought was a shock. Her scientific mind rebelled. This was geology, not mythology. These carvings were folklore, and this energy was a phenomenon to be studied, not a sacred force to be patched up like a leaking pipe. Yet the evidence was right there, bleeding light into the cave. She moved to the wall, her geologist's hands joining his. Together, they worked to seal the fracture. As her fingers brushed the vibrating stone, she felt the power coursing through it, a torrent of potential. It felt like holding a star. What if this energy could power cities, heal lands, change everything? Kael was treating it like a dangerous beast to be caged. A small, glowing shard of crystal, dislodged from the repair, glittered at her feet. Proof. She needed proof. While Kael's back was turned, her fingers closed around the warm, throbbing stone. She slipped it into her pocket, her heart pounding with a new kind of tremor. It was for science, for understanding. It was necessary. The moment the shard left the cave, the light in the wall seemed to dim. Kael paused, his shoulders tense, but said nothing. He had seen her cooperation, and a sliver of his wariness had eased. When they stepped back into the open air, the change was immediate and horrifying. The lush ferns and vibrant mosses that had surrounded the cave entrance were now brown and brittle, their life force drained away in the short time they had been inside. The death was localized, a perfect circle of decay. Kael's face hardened, his eyes sweeping the blighted ground before settling on her with a fresh, cold suspicion. He did not accuse her. He did not need to. The withered plants were a silent, damning testimony she now carried deep within her soul, a guilt as heavy as the stolen crystal in her pocket. The stolen crystal burned a hole in her pocket all the way back to camp. Elara slipped into her analysis tent, her hands trembling as she locked the flap. She had to know. She placed the glowing shard on her portable spectrometer, its smooth surface pulsing with a soft, internal light. The machine whirred to life, its laser scanning the crystal. For a single, hopeful second, data streamed across her screen. Then the readouts exploded into a chaotic mess of error codes. A spark shot from the spectrometer's port, the acrid smell of burnt plastic, filling the air as the device died with a final, pathetic flicker. A high-pitched whine pierced her skull, a sound of pure agony that seemed to come from the crystal itself, a frequency so sharp and painful that only she could perceive it. She clapped her hands over her ears, but the noise was internal, a scream echoing directly in her mind. The tent flap was torn open. Her team leader, Mark, stood silhouetted against the twilight, his face a mask of frustration and concern. Elara, what in the world is going on? First, the energy spike last night. Now this. You have been distant, secretive, and now you are frying thousands of dollars worth of equipment. I cannot have a loose cannon on this survey. If you cannot give me a straight answer, I am pulling you from the project. His words were a professional death sentence, but they barely registered. Behind him, at the very edge of the camp's perimeter lights, another figure stood, Kale. His grim expression was more terrifying than any official reprimand. He had felt the crystal's distress call. She was trapped between two worlds. One demanded she lie, protect her career, and dismiss the old man as a delusional hermit. The other, the one that felt the crystal's pain and saw the dying plants, whispered that her career was a meaningless price to pay for a truth that could save everything. The whine in her head intensified, a relentless plea. Her loyalty to science shattered against the undeniable reality of a living Earth. She made her choice. Ignoring Mark's protests, she pushed past him, her feet carrying her directly to Kale, the stolen crystal held out in her open, shaking palm. "I took it," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I am so sorry. I did not understand." Kale's gaze fell upon the crystal, his eyes filled with a deep, weary sorrow. He did not scold her. "You have not stolen a rock," he said, his voice low and grave. "You have torn a heart node from the world's body. It is a focal point, a convergence where the lattice's energy gathers and flows strongest." His hand swept toward the darkening forest. "Without it, the flow is sickened. Can you not feel it?" She followed his gesture, and now she could see it. The usual night sounds were absent, replaced by an uneasy silence. A herd of deer stood listless at the tree line, their heads drooping, and above them, the sky was churning, clouds boiling into a bruised purple vortex with an unnatural, terrifying speed. The local weather was destabilizing, turning violent because she had pulled a single, vital piece from a system of perfect, invisible balance. The meadow was dying before their eyes. Where wildflowers had bloomed in vibrant reds and yellows just days before, now only limp, gray stalks remained. The very air felt thin and depleted. Kale led Elara to the center of the blighted circle, where the golden light in the soil pulsed weakly, like a fading heartbeat. "We must act now," he said, his voice tight. "This is a realignment, not a repair. We are not fixing a pipe. We are persuading a river to change its course." He instructed her to place her hands on a specific, cooler patch of earth where the energy still flowed strong. Her task was to act as a conduit, a human bridge, using her innate sensitivity to guide the healthy flow toward the sickened zone. Her geologist's mind mapped the subsurface topology, identifying the path of least resistance through layers of shale and sediment. As Kale began a low, humming chant, she focused, visualizing the energy as a stream of molten gold. A searing heat shot up her arms. It was not the warmth of the sun, but a raw, elemental power that flooded her nerves, scorching and sublime. She gritted her teeth, holding the connection open, forcing the light to bleed across the barren soil. Slowly, a faint gold tracery returned to the withered roots. A few wildflowers perked up, their color returning as a pale, washed-out echo of their former glory. Then the connection broke. Kale staggered back, his face ashen with exhaustion. Elara collapsed to her knees, her vision swimming as a piercing migraine drilled into her temples, a brutal tax for touching a power she was not born to command. "This is a temporary solution," Kale breathed, wiping sweat from his brow. "It will not hold. We need a permanent way to monitor the entire lattice, to predict these failures before they happen." Elara argued, her voice strained. We could design sensors, an interface to rid the energy flow without causing it pain. That is the thinking that created this wound, Kale countered, his eyes flashing. You see a system to be managed. I see a spirit to be listened to. Your technology shouts. It does not whisper. It agitates. It does not soothe. We need reverence, not more machines. Their argument hung in the newly fragile air, a fundamental clash of worlds. But looking at the faint life she had helped restore, Elara knew her old path was gone. She had felt the Earth's pain as her own. Pulling out her satellite phone, she made the call to her team leader. Her voice was remarkably steady. Mark, it's Elara. A family emergency has come up back home. I need to take a leave of absence, effective immediately. The lie felt like ash in her mouth, but it was necessary. It severed her last tether to her old life, her credibility, her safety net. She was now entirely in Kale's world, dependent on his ancient knowledge. As she ended the call, a low, deep groan resonated up from the ground, a sound of structural agony that made the previous tremor feel like a sigh. Kale's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a dread she had not seen before. That is not a surface wound, he whispered. The fracture is deeper than I feared. It is in the bedrock, in the world's very spine. The deep groan from the earth did not fade. It settled into a constant, low-frequency vibration that hummed through the soles of their boots. Kale's expression was grim. We must go to the source, he said, his voice barely a whisper against the growing rumble. He led her away from the recovering meadow, toward a jagged line of cliffs where steam hissed from 100 tiny fissures. This was not a path for survey equipment or rational maps. Kale moved with an instinctual grace, his fingers brushing specific moss, covered stones, or pausing to listen to the pitch of the escaping steam before choosing a route. Elara, in turn, used her geologist's eye to rid the rock itself. She pointed out veins of unstable shale that promised a landslide and identified the harder, more stable granite shelves that could bear their weight. It was an uneasy alliance of ancient intuition and modern science, a dance on a crumbling floor. They reached a wide, sulfur-stained crevasse, its depths glowing with a sickly, pulsating orange light. This was the fault line. Here, the veins of light were not just cracked. They were frayed and unraveling, their golden strands sputtering like damaged electrical cables. The rock surrounding them was hot enough to sear skin, crumbling to brittle, blackened dust at the slightest touch. The air itself was thick and heavy, pressing in on them with a physical weight. A tremor shook the passage, dislodging a shower of sharp stones. Elara threw herself against a wall, her heart hammering as a boulder, the size of her torso, crashed where she had just been standing. A jet of superheated steam erupted from a new crack, narrowly missing Kale. The earth was not just wounded, it was fighting back. The main tunnel ahead was choked with a fresh collapse of rock and debris. Elara's analytical mind immediately began calculating the tonnage, assessing the stability of the pile, looking for a way through. But Kale was already turning away, his hand pressed against a smooth, unremarkable section of the wall. This way, he urged. It is the only path. She stared at him in disbelief. He was pointing toward a narrow, dark opening that looked like little more than a crack, a dead end by any logical assessment. Her data screamed that it led nowhere, To trust him was to abandon every principle of her training. Another deep groan shuddered through the mountain, and a web of new cracks raced across the ceiling above the main collapse. There was no time for debate. With a final, desperate look at the impassable tunnel, she made her choice, scrambling after him into the suffocating darkness. The narrow passage was not a dead end. It was a throat, constricting around them for a terrifying minute before opening into a space so vast her headlamp could not find its ceiling. The air was cool and humming with immense power. They stood at the edge of a colossal cavern, its walls and ceiling encrusted with gigantic, pulsing crystals. Each one was a heart node, 1,000 times larger than the shard she had stolen, all connected by rivers of pure, flowing light that converged in the cavern's center. This was the source, the planet's vibrant, beating core, but the magnificent sight was marred by a horrifying flaw. A deep, black fissure had ripped through the center of the lattice, and from it, the light bled out in frantic, uncontrolled bursts, sputtering and dying in the stagnant air. The fracture was not on the surface. It was in the world's soul, and they were not alone. At the far edges of the cavern, where the crystalline light grew dim, shadows began to detach themselves from the rock. They were sinuous, insect-like forms, their carapaces glistening with a dull, oily sheen. They moved with a jerky, agitated energy, skittering toward the bleeding fissure. They were not there to heal. They were drawn to the sickness, to the chaotic energy leaking from the wound, scavengers feeding on the world's decay. As one, their multifaceted eyes swiveled toward the two intruders, and a chorus of clicking, chittering sounds filled the cavern, a sound of pure, predatory hunger. The clicking chorus of the creatures echoed like shattering glass in the vast cavern. They surged forward, drawn to the bleeding light of the fracture, their insectoid legs scraping against the crystal floor. Kale moved first, his staff slamming down. A pulse of pure, white light erupted from its tip, not a weapon of destruction, but a wall of pure order. The lead creatures recoiled, hissing as their oily carapaces smoked. Elara fumbled with her damaged scanner, her fingers flying across its cracked screen. She rerouted all power to its sonic emitter, remembering the painful whine the stolen crystal had produced. She aimed it at the swarm and activated it. A high-frequency shriek, inaudible to her and Kale, ripped through the air. The creatures shuddered, their coordinated advance breaking into a disoriented stumble as the chaotic sound assaulted their senses. Together, light and sound pushed the scavengers back into the shadows, but their victory was fragile. The intense sonic pulse resonated through the cavern, vibrating the already stressed ceiling. With a deafening crack, a massive slab of crystal and rock broke free, crashing down between them and the tunnel they had entered. The impact shook the ground, and when the dust settled, they were sealed in. The only light was the frantic, irregular pulse of the wounded Lattice. Panic was a cold fist in Elara's chest. The air already felt thinner, warmer. "We are trapped," she breathed, the words tasting like dust. "They are not mere beasts," Kale said, his voice low and grave as he stared into the darkness where the creatures had retreated. "They are the keepers, the first guardians of the Lattice, but the sickness has twisted them. They now protect the decay, for it is all they know." Elara shook her head, her scientific mind rejecting the idea of corrupted spirits. "No, look at them. Their biology is adapting, she argued, pointing to a carcass left behind. Their shells are forming crystalline layers to harness the erratic energy. This is not a corruption. It is an evolution, a terrible, rapid evolution driven by the Lattice's instability. They are a new form of life, born from this sickness. The debate hung between them, a fundamental divide in a tomb of crystal and stone. But arguing would not give them air. Elara's gaze fell upon the fractured lattice, its light dying by the second, and then to the warm, guilty weight of the stolen shard in her pocket. An idea, reckless and brilliant, sparked in her mind. She pulled out the heart node. Its glow was faint, but it still pulsed in sync with the massive crystals around them. "We do not have the strength to push the river back into its course," she said, her voice steadying with a scientist's focus. "But maybe we can build a temporary dam. This shard belongs here. What if I use it as a focal point, a bridge to guide the frayed energy lines back together?" "It is a needle trying to stitch a lightning bolt," Kale warned, his eyes wide with alarm. "You could vaporize us both. Do we have another choice?" Elara asked, already moving toward the pulsing wound. She ignored the searing heat, pressing the shard directly against the largest of the frayed, sputtering light strands. She focused not on forcing the energy, but on inviting it, using the shard's innate connection as a pathway. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, a torrent of golden light erupted from the shard, arcing across the fracture. It was not a gentle healing, but a brilliant, violent suture of pure energy. The black fissure sealed over, blazing with a temporary, perfect light that flooded the cavern with the warmth of a newborn sun. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. As the energy feedback surged through her, Elara's mind was blasted open. It was not just power she felt, it was a presence, vast, ancient, and endlessly complex. A sentient consciousness woven into the very fabric of the light. It was the awareness of the world itself, a single, silent question echoed in the core of her being, a wave of ancient, questioning thought that washed over both her and Kale. "Who are you?" The question echoed not in her ears, but in the substance of her mind. The presence of the Earth Song was a vast and silent ocean, and Elara was a single drop of water, finally understanding the sea. There were no words. Instead, a cascade of images flooded her consciousness. She saw the lattice in its prime, a perfect, humming tapestry of light-sustaining lush, forgotten forests, and crystalline cities in harmony with the land. Then came the vibrations, the deep, grating hum of massive machines, and the percussive shock of detonations from the world above. Each one was a hammer blow to the delicate lattice. She saw her own seismic survey charges, small and insignificant on their own, but part of that same violent chorus. A wave of shame, so profound it felt physical wash through her. Her life's work, her science, had been a tiny, contributing note in a symphony of destruction. The Earth Song was not angry. It was grieving, showing them the accelerating decay, the fraying of connections that held entire ecosystems in balance. The demand it placed upon them was clear and immense. A cascading failure was imminent. If the primary Nexus Point failed, the energy flow for an entire continent would collapse, turning fertile lands to dust within a generation. The pressure was a physical weight, the fate of millions resting on the two of them. Kale met her gaze across the shimmering light, his own eyes wide with the same shared vision. The old division between them crumbled to nothing. "We cannot do this alone," he said, his voice thick with reverence. "Your science and my tradition are not opposing forces. They are two hands that must work together to carry this burden." Elara nodded, her throat tight. "I vow to listen," she whispered, placing her hand on the warm stone. "And I vow to understand. Together we will find a way." Their promise, spoken into the quiet stone, was absorbed by the earth song. In response, a final vision blossomed in their minds, a map of blinding complexity. It showed the location of the primary nexus, the heart of the continental lattice, a place where all the veins of light converged into a single, brilliant star. But the path to reach it was a nightmare. The route led through lands now torn by the lattice's distress, a geography of sheer cliffs and boiling geysers, of shifting ground and air, poisoned by leaking energy. The way forward was not dark. It was illuminated by the treacherous, flickering glow of a world on the verge of coming apart. Their journey became a desperate race across a landscape, tearing itself apart. Elara's retooled scanner was their only guide, its screen now a frantic map of energetic decay. She calibrated it constantly, her fingers a blur as she adjusted the sensors to rid the lattice's stability, not its power. They skirted vast, shimmering sinkholes where the ground was little more than a brittle crust over a void of sputtering light, and navigated valleys where the air itself crackled with a static that made their hair stand on end. Every step was a calculation, a choice between one path of crumbling rock and another. In response, Kale would kneel, place his palms on the trembling earth, and hum his low, resonant songs. The ancient melodies did not stop the tremors, but they seemed to soften the land's violent shudders into weary sighs, granting them precious seconds to cross a shaking ledge or a field of newly opened fissures. This constant, careful dance of survival forged a bond deeper than words. They moved as one organism, her science and his tradition finally in sync, and as days bled into nights illuminated by the land's own failing light, Elara began to hear it. The lattice was not just a network of power, it was a symphony. The stable flows were a deep, resonant cello section, the frayed lines a shrieking violin, the distant, steady pulse of the nexus, a hopeful choir. She was no longer just reading data. She was listening to the planet's dying song, but the music was attracting an audience. The scavenging creatures were always just at the edge of their vision, their numbers swelling with every mile. The weaker the lattice became, the bolder they grew. Their chittering was a constant, horrifying percussion to the earth's melody, a reminder that they were both being hunted. The chase culminated at a colossal chasm, its bottom lost in a mist of rising, sickly energy. The only way across was a natural archway of pure, crystalline lattice, so thin it was nearly translucent. It pulsed with a fragile, flickering light. Behind them, the clicking grew to a frenzied crescendo as the swarm emerged from the tree line. "We have to run," Elara urged, her heart in her throat. Kale shook his head, his eyes fixed on the delicate bridge. "To run is to shatter it with our fear. We must walk. We must trust its strength." It was the hardest decision of her life. With the sounds of the hunters scraping closer, she took the first step onto the arch. It vibrated like a plucked harp string, but held. Step by agonizing step, they moved across the void, their focus entirely on the subtle music of the crystal beneath their feet. They were halfway across when the lead creature, a massive, multi-limbed horror, scuttled onto the bridge behind them. It did not walk, it lunged. Its weight was the final insult. The archway screamed, a sound of shearing crystal, and a large section directly behind them exploded into glittering dust. The creature fell into the chasm without a sound, but its demise was not silent. As it vaporized in the raw energy below, it released a concussive shockwave that traveled up the local veins of light. The entire chasm flashed with a painful, white burst. Far, far in the distance, the Nexus responded. It pulsed once, a deep, thunderous beat of light that washed over the horizon. It was not a welcome. It was a flare of agony, a sign that their desperate journey had just made the world's final heartbeat that much weaker. The distant pulse of agony from the Nexus was a wound in the air itself, a thrumming pain that guided them the final, brutal miles. They finally crested a jagged ridge, and the sight that greeted them stole the breath from their lungs. The Nexus was not a cave or a mountain peak. It was a floating archipelago of earth and crystal, suspended in a vast cavern over a seething lake of pure, liquid light. Massive islands of bedrock, woven through with veins of gold, drifted in a slow, solemn dance, connected by arches of humming energy. It was the heart of the world, and it was dying. The light from the lake below was dimming, and the islands listed at sickening angles. Guarding this sacred space were the Geoliths. They were not statues. They were sentient beings of living stone, their forms rough-hewn and ancient, rising from the floating islands like moving mountains. As Elara and Kale approached the shimmering shore of the lake, the ground before them erupted. A geolith unfolded itself, standing 3 times the height of a man, its body a mosaic of granite and obsidian. It did not speak with a voice, but with a seismic vibration that shot up through their bones, a language of pure pressure and resonance that was a physical assault. The message was a single, clear command. Halt. Kale stepped forward, his own voice a low, guttural hum, using the old tongue of the earth to plead their case. The geolith responded with another, sharper tremor, a vibration of deep distrust that focused entirely on Elara. It saw her tools, her clothing, the scent of the surface whirled upon her. To them, she was not a savior. She was the very source of the decay, another human come to pick at the world's bones. Elara's scanner screamed with data, its screen overloading with the complex language of shifting tectonic pressure and resonant frequency. She couldn't understand the words, but she could read the intent in the violent shudders through the rock. They are not just blocking our path, she realized, her voice tight with awe and fear. They are judging us. This is a trial. She focused her scanner, filtering out the chaotic noise of the failing Nexus to isolate the Geolith's specific vibrational patterns. It was a grammar of grinding stone and subtle harmonic shifts. He is telling them we are here to heal, Kale translated, his brow furrowed in concentration. But they do not believe my words alone. The largest of the Geoliths took a ground-shaking step forward, and Elara saw it. A deep, black fissure ran down its torso, leaking a faint, sickly energy. This was not a random injury. It was a reflection of the Nexus' own mortal wound. They see our weakness, Kale whispered. They see that we are as damaged as the world we wish to save. A desperate idea, born from the fusion of her science and his understanding, crystallized in Elara's mind. She couldn't speak their language, but she could speak the language of repair. "Look," she said, her voice cutting through the tense silence. She pointed not at the guardian, but at the crack in its chest. "Let me help you. Let me mend this." Kael's eyes widened in alarm, but he relayed her offer in a series of low, resonant tones. The geoliths went perfectly still. The air grew heavy, the decision hanging in the balance. Then the cracked geolith lowered its immense head, a gesture of consent that was more terrifying than any refusal. Elara approached the being, her heart hammering. This was not like sealing a fissure in a wall. This was surgery on a living entity. She placed her hands on the stone, feeling the chaotic, pained vibrations coursing through the crack. Her scanner mapped the fracture's depth and the flow of the corrupted energy. She needed to find the precise resonant frequency that would coax the stone's own structure to knit back together. It was like tuning a colossal stone instrument. She whispered instructions to Kale, who began to hum a specific, stabilizing melody. As he sang, Elara used a small, precise tool from her kit to tap gently at the edges of the fissure, adjusting the pitch and rhythm until the stone itself began to vibrate in harmony with Kale's song. Slowly, grudgingly, the jagged crack began to seal, the leaking light receding as the granite granulated and reformed into a smooth, solid whole. When it was done, the repaired geolith straightened, its form now radiating a stable, warm hum. It turned its stony gaze upon Elara, and the hostility was gone, replaced by a deep, ancient curiosity. A new series of vibrations, slower and more complex, passed through the ground. Elara's scanner translated the gist, a cascade of pressure and resonance that formed a single, stunning revelation. The Nexus fails not from a simple wound, the geoliths communicated. Its heart is missing. The keystone, the first crystal from which all others grew, was stolen long ago. Without it, the Lattice cannot hold. Your quest does not end here. It has just begun. You must find what was lost. The vision unfolded in the shared space of their minds, a silent movie projected by the geoliths' collective memory. They saw a magnificent, clear crystal, the keystone, pulsing at the center of the Nexus, the anchor of all creation. Then came the robed figures, an order of ancient builders whose ambition overshadowed their reverence. They did not listen to the earth's song, they sought to command its chorus. With tools of resonant bronze and focused will, they pried the keystone from its cradle, stealing the heart of the world to power their soaring, crystalline city. For a time, it worked. The city glowed with stolen glory, a monument to human ingenuity. But the Lattice, severed from its source, began to fray. The earth, in its grief and rage, responded. The very ground upon which the city stood turned to quicksand, swallowing towers and ambition alike, burying the crime and its punishment under layers of stone and time. Elara's breath caught in her throat, the geological formations in the vision, the specific layering of sedimentary rock. She knew this sight. "I have seen these ruins," she whispered, her voice trembling with a horsing realization. It was in the preliminary survey data for the new tectonic river gorge dam project. They are scheduled to break ground in 3 weeks. The excavation will dig directly into the burial chamber. They will not just find a relic, they will unseal a tomb and unleash the decay that has been festering there for millennia. The air in the cavern grew thick with the pressure of this new, ticking clock. Kale turned to the geoliths, his hums and gestures forming a desperate plea. We must go. We must retrieve what was lost and bring it home. The stone guardians vibrated with clear distrust. To let the surface dwellers leave was a risk they had no reason to take. You ask for our heart, and then for our faith, their seismic language rumbled. Why should we trust you will return? Elara knew a geologist's word would mean nothing here. It was a promise they had to make, a bridge they had to build with the only materials they had. I will send a message to my old team, she declared, an idea forming with desperate clarity. I will not tell them the truth, but I will use my final shred of credibility to buy us time. I will report evidence of massively unstable substrata, of a fault line directly beneath the site. It is not even a lie, not really. It is the deepest truth of all. Composing the satellite message was a delicate act of sabotage. She chose every word with the precision of a surgeon, citing fabricated but plausible data, leveraging her reputation to sound a false alarm that was, in reality, a true warning. She felt a pang of guilt for the deception, but the sight of the listing, dying Nexus, hardened her resolve. This was a greater truth than any single scientific fact. The Geoliths observed her, their stony silence a judgment in itself. Finally, after a communication that seemed to stretch for an age, they consented. But you will not go alone. From the circle of giants, a smaller, more agile form stepped forward. It was barely twice Elara's height, its body composed of sleek, dark shale that seemed to drink the light. This is Shard, the Geoliths intoned. It will be your guide through the deep stone and the guardian of our trust. Should your promise prove empty, it will be your tomb. With Shard moving beside them, its steps silent and impossibly light for a being of stone, they turned their backs on the fading heart of the world. Their race was no longer just against the Lattice's decay, but against the bulldozers and drills of her own world, a world blissfully unaware that it was about to wake a sleeping giant with the loudest machines ever built. The Badlands were a wound in the world's skin. The ground was a brittle, shifting mosaic of shale and cracked clay, and the air shimmered with chaotic energy that made Elara's teeth ache. Above them, the veins of light were not golden rivers but frayed, sputtering threads of sickly orange and violent purple. Every step was a gamble on unstable ground. Shard moved with a fluid grace that defied its stone form, its dark shale body constantly shifting. When a patch of ground would suddenly glow with disruptive energy, threatening to dissolve into a sinkhole, Shard would step into the center of the turmoil. Its body would absorb the chaotic vibrations, the dark stone flickering with internal stress lines as it grounded the disruption. With each intervention, the geolith moved a little slower, its sleek form developing a fine network of new cracks. It was sacrificing its own integrity to pave their way. The ruins of the sunken city rose from the dust like the bleached bones of a forgotten giant. Towers of pearlescent crystal, sheared off and tilted at impossible angles, jutted from the earth. A profound silence hung over everything, a silence that was abruptly shattered as they crossed a buried threshold. A glyph carved into a fallen archway flared with harsh blue light, and a shimmering wall of solid force erupted from the ground, slicing between them. From the ghostly structures around them, humanoid figures of woven light and ancient metal unfolded, their movements jerky and precise. They were the city's last sentinels, programmed to defend a corpse. The labyrinth of traps was a deadly puzzle. Kale's low chance could disrupt the simpler energy constructs, causing them to flicker and dissolve. But for the more complex systems, a floor that phased in and out of existence, a corridor lined with projectors that fired shards of solidified sound, Elara's scanner was their only key. She would map the resonant frequency of a defensive glyph, and Kale would match it with his voice, canceling it out. They moved in a desperate harmony, a dance of humming tradition and whirring technology, each saving the other from a sudden, crystalline death. Their fragile synergy shattered in a wide plaza. The moment Elara's foot touched a central tile, the entire section of the ground she was on dropped away, becoming a floating island that shot toward the central citadel, separating her from Kale and Shard. She watched in horror as a cage of crackling energy descended, trapping her companions. Kale's voice was a distant shout, urging her to go back, but the citadel loomed before her, its doors open like a silent invitation. The Keystone was the only thing that could save the Nexus, save everything. To turn back now was to fail the world. With a final, agonized look at her trapped friends, she turned and ran into the heart of the city. The Citadel's vault was not hidden. Its immense doors, made of a single piece of polished obsidian, were already swung wide. The chamber within was vast and circular, designed to house something of immense power. In the center, on a pedestal of pure white quartz, was a perfect crystalline indentation, the exact shape and size of the Keystone, but the pedestal was empty. A fine layer of dust coated the stand, disturbed only by a single, fresh set of bootprints leading away from it. The Keystone was gone. The hollow silence of the vault was louder than any trap, filled with a dread so profound it felt like the end of the world had already arrived, unnoticed. The bootprints were a fresh scar in the ancient dust. Elara's eyes followed them to a discarded carabiner, its polished steel gleaming against the dull stone, and then to a scatter of battery packs from a high-grade resonance scanner. The energy signature lingering in the air was a perfect match for her own equipment. The theft was not the work of ancient ghosts. It was a crime of the present, committed by someone who knew exactly what they were looking for and how to find it. Someone from her own team. A cold wave of betrayal washed over her, so potent it felt like a physical blow. Her own secrecy, her initial theft of the heart node, had planted this poisonous idea. She had shown them that the earth held secrets worth taking, and now one of them had acted on it. She raced back to the plaza, her mind churning with a bitter mix of guilt and fury. With a few precise taps on her scanner, she found the resonant key to deactivate the energy cage, freeing Kale and Shard. "They are gone," she choked out, the words tasting like ash. "One of my people has the Keystone. They are using my research, my methods. This is my fault." Kale's face was grim, but his voice was steady. "Your guilt will not mend the Lattice. Your rage will not find the crystal. We must move." He pointed to her scanner, which was still humming with the residual energy trace. "Can you follow that?" Elara nodded, her jaw tight with resolve. "It is a beacon. They are not shielding it. The Keystone is screaming into the void as they move. We can track it." Their decision propelled them out of the dead city and back toward the world she had tried to leave behind, but the world was now actively resisting the Keystone's journey. The sky above the Badlands churned with a bruised purple storm that crackled with unnatural lightning. The ground shuddered in sporadic, sickening lurches, as if the land itself were flinching from the stolen heart. A localized tornado of dust and energy spun into existence a mile ahead, a direct and violent protest to the crystal's passage. The thief had a significant head start, racing toward the modern infrastructure of roads and power grids with a power they could not possibly comprehend, and the planet was trying to stop them with every tool it had left. The chase was no longer just a race against time, but a desperate sprint through a world coming undone at the seams. The energy signature burned like a brand on her scanner's screen, leading them away from the wildlands and toward a cluster of low, metallic buildings humming with industrial power. It was a private research outpost, the kind funded by corporate interests hungry for the next breakthrough. Elara's blood ran cold. She knew this facility's design, its purpose. And she knew the man who would be running it. Inside the main lab, surrounded by monitors and crystalline amplification arrays, stood Dr. Eris, her former mentor. The man who had taught her to question everything. He was staring in rapt fascination at the keystone, which floated in a complex containment field, its light pulsing in a frantic, distressed rhythm. "Eris," she said, her voice cutting through the sterile air. "What have you done?" He turned, his face lighting up not with guilt, but with a feverish pride. "Elara, I knew you would see the potential. Your initial data, those fragmented reports you filed before your disappearance, they were a trail of breadcrumbs. You led me right to it." He gestured to the keystone, as if it were a new element he had discovered. "We can synthesize its energy signature. We can power entire nations with this. It is the end of the energy crisis. Can you not see the good? This is not a battery, Eris," she pleaded, her voice straining. "You are not harnessing a resource. You are torturing a living system. The lattice is connected to this crystal. What you are doing here is causing earthquakes and storms out there." Eris' expression hardened, the scientist's disdain for the mystical surfacing. "Superstition. You have been out in the wilds for too long. You are listening to fairy tales told by old men. This is the future. Your legacy could have been this, Elara. Not running from shadows, the ground beneath the facility gave a sudden, violent lurch, and a monitor on the wall exploded in a shower of sparks. The containment field flickered, and a visible arc of raw energy lashed out, scorching the ceiling. "See, that is the feedback," Kale warned from the doorway, his voice a low growl. "You are not in control." Panic flickered in Eris' eyes, but it was quickly smothered by ambition and fear. He could not lose this. His backers, his reputation, his entire life's work was tied to this single, glowing prize. "You leave me no choice," he said, his voice cold. He slammed his hand down on a console. "I cannot let you sabotage this. Security Protocol Alpha." Heavy blast doors slammed down over every exit, and a series of laser grids activated, cutting off their retreat. Alarms blared in a deafening chorus as the containment field began to fail in earnest, its light stuttering like a dying heart. The klaxon screamed a mechanical death rattle as the facility went into total lockdown. There was no time for a plan, only instinct. Elara pointed to a junction box, spitting sparks from a wall. "I can overload the main grid," she shouted over the din. "It might destabilize the containment field long enough for us to get through." Kale was already on his knees, his hands pressed to the shuddering floor, his voice rising in a low, protective chant. that formed a bubble of calm air around them, deflecting the worst of the searing energy arcs that lashed from the failing machinery. And Shard, the Geolith, moved to the buckling main support pillar. It pressed its dark shale body against the groaning metal, its own form cracking under the strain as it physically reinforced the structure, holding the ceiling up through sheer, silent will. It was a desperate, three-part dance of sabotage, shielding, and sheer strength. Their chaotic efforts created a narrow window of opportunity. A power surge initiated by Elara caused the laser grids to flicker and die. A shield woven by Kale allowed them to pass through a corridor filled with disruptive energy. A wall held up by Shard let them reach the final lab door. They burst into the chamber to find the keystone in its death throes. Trapped in the artificial containment field, it was no longer pulsing, but convulsing, its light flaring in painful, white-hot bursts. And Eris, his face a mask of terrified ambition, was at the main console, his hand hovering over a large, red initiation switch. "No," Elara yelled. "A full power drain will sever it completely. It will explode. It is the only way to save the data," he screamed back, his eyes wild. "I will not lose it all." His fingers descended toward the switch. There was no time to reach him, no time to reason. Elara's eyes met the keystone's frantic light. She remembered the feel of the lattice within her, the minor resonance she had cultivated on their journey. It was a tiny stream compared to this ocean, but it was a connection. It was home. She did not leap for the console. She threw herself toward the crystal itself. Her hands outstretched, connected with the searing surface of the keystone. For a single, silent moment, nothing happened. Then the universe turned inside out. A conduit of pure, blinding energy erupted from the crystal, arcing directly into her chest. It did not vaporize her. It used her. She became a living grounding rod, a temporary vessel for the overload, channeling the chaotic power away from a catastrophic explosion and down through her body, safely into the waiting earth below. The light was so brilliant it erased the world. When it faded, the containment field was dead. The keystone, now a soft, steady glow, rested on the floor. Elara lay beside it, unmoving, her body limp and her fate a terrifying, open question. Kale caught her before she hit the floor, her body impossibly light in his arms. The air in the lab, once screaming with energy, was now still and heavy with the scent of ozone and regret. Across the room, Shard moved with a profound gentleness, its stone fingers carefully cradling the keystone. The crystal, no longer frantic, pulsed with a soft, steady warmth, its light reflecting in the Geolith's unblinking eyes. Dr. Eris stood frozen by his console, his face pale, as he stared at the scorch marks on the ceiling and the unconscious woman who had channeled a power his machines could not even measure. The ambition had drained from him, leaving only the hollow shell of a man who had nearly broken the world for a theory. Elara was breathing, but it was a shallow, fragile rhythm. A faint, golden luminescence shimmered just beneath her skin, a visible current of the lattice energy that now coursed through her veins. She had become a living part of the flow she sought to save, and the cost of that union was a deep, unresponsive slumber. Outside, the violent storm that had raged began to subside, the unnatural lightning fading to a distant rumble. The earth's agonized tremors softened into a weary stillness. The immediate crisis was over, but the human one remained. Kale looked from Elara's still form to the shattered man who had caused this. The old traditions spoke of harsh justice for those who violated the sacred balance. But he saw no villain in Eris, only a reflection of the curiosity that had once driven Elara, amplified by pride and fear. Vengeance would not heal the Lattice. He made his choice. "You will not speak of what happened here," Kale said, his voice not threatening, but firm as the bedrock. "You will report a catastrophic equipment failure, a geomagnetic anomaly. You will use your influence to have this site sealed, marked as unstable and off limits. This is your path to redemption. Use your resources to protect the secret you tried to steal." Eris could only nod, his shoulders slumping in a mixture of shame and relief. The weight of his near catastrophe was a heavier sentence than any prison. As Kale lifted Elara, Shard stepped forward, the keystone held securely against its chest. The Geoliths' presence was a silent promise that their guardianship would not waver. There was no more time. With Elara stabilized but trapped in her enchanted sleep, they turned their backs on the world of machines and began the long journey home. The path back to the Nexus felt different. The land itself seemed to recognize the returning heart. Where the ground had been brittle and treacherous, it now felt firm and supportive. The veins of light in the sky above glowed with a stronger, clearer gold, their song a gentle, welcoming hum that guided their steps. The Lattice was sighing in profound relief, its strength returning with every mile they traveled toward its core. But the warm glow of the keystone in Shard's grasp was a constant, bittersweet reminder of the price their harmony had demanded, a price carried in the silent form of the woman who had bridged two worlds and now slept between them. The land itself seemed to breathe a sigh of relief as they traveled. Withered plants along their path straightened, their leaves flushing with a vibrant, impossible green as the keystone passed. The chaotic, sputtering veins of light overhead smoothed into steady, golden rivers, their song shifting from a scream of agony to a hum of profound gratitude. It was a solemn procession, a homecoming for the world's own heart, and the planet celebrated their return with every blade of grass. The Geoliths awaited them at the shore of the luminous lake, their stony forms radiating a deep, resonant welcome. This was not the guarded reception of before. They parted their ranks, forming an honor guard, their seismic vibrations a language of pure respect. They were not seen as petitioners anymore, but as heroes returning with the only thing that could save them all. Without a word, Shard moved to the center of the floating islands and placed the keystone back into its cradle upon the white quartz pedestal. The moment it settled into place, a wave of pure, stable light erupted from the Nexus, washing through the cavern in a warm, silent tide. The listing islands righted themselves, and the lake of light below glowed with the fierce, steady brilliance of a newborn star. But their victory was incomplete. Gently, Kale laid Elara's still form upon a platform of pure crystal that rose from the center of the Nexus, a bed offered by the world itself. Here, at the very heart of the energy flow, the concentrated power could sustain her body, where machines and medicine would have failed. The conflict was no longer against thieves or traps. It was internal, a biological and spiritual war raging within her. Could her human body, her mortal mind, withstand the permanent fusion with the Lattice's raw energy? The faint golden luminescence still pulsed beneath her skin, a visible sign that she was now a part of the flow, but the cost of that union was a deep, unresponsive slumber. She was a bridge between worlds, and she was trapped in the space between. Kale made his decision without hesitation. He would not leave her side. Sitting at the edge of the crystal platform, he began to sing. He sang the old, slow songs of healing and balance, the same melodies he had used to calm the trembling earth. But now, he poured his own spirit into the effort, his voice a constant, gentle anchor thrown into the vast ocean of her unconsciousness, a lifeline meant to call her back from the abyss. The fate of everything now hinged on this single, silent struggle. The Geoliths communicated a grave new truth. Elara was no mere human who had touched the lattice. She had become a unique conduit, a living keystone in her own right. Her stillness created a void the entire Nexus waited to fill, a potential for a new kind of balance that the world had never known. Her awakening was not just a hope, it was a necessity for the future of both the old world and the new. 3 days passed in the silent, constant vigil of the Nexus. Then, on the crystal platform, Elara's eyes opened. They were no longer just human eyes. They glowed with the soft, steady light of the veins themselves. She rose, her movements no longer bound by the same physical laws, her body moving with a fluid grace that seemed to be part of the energy flowing around her. Her perception had shattered its old limits. She could feel the entire planet now, not as a map, but as a living, breathing entity. She felt the strong, deep pulse of the healthy Nexus, the fainter, steady flows through stable continents, and the delicate, healing threads in places once wounded. She was a living conduit, the first human in millennia to hold the full awareness of the lattice without being burned away by its immensity. It was a perfect, terrifying synthesis of her science and Kael's spirit. The first wave of her own joy at awakening sent a ripple through the local energy field, causing the floating islands to bob gently, like boats on a calm sea. A flicker of her momentary fear made the light in the cavern dim for a heartbeat. Her every emotion was no longer a private thing. It was a weather system, a seismic event. The responsibility of it was a weight more immense than any mountain. She looked at Kale, who had not stopped singing for 3 days, and then to the Geoliths, their stony faces etched with a patient, ancient hope. Her old life was a distant memory. Her new purpose crystallized with a clarity that felt as natural as breathing. She would be a guardian, a translator. She would stand between humanity's restless curiosity and the Earth Song's ancient, vulnerable spirit, ensuring that no more keystones would be stolen and no more fractures would be born from ignorance. With a thought that was both her own and the Lattice's, she floated from the platform toward the center of the Nexus. The keystone, which had been resting safely with Shard, lifted gently into the air and drifted to meet her. Her first conscious act as this new being was one of restoration. She did not place the crystal with her hands. She guided it, a final, perfect piece in a cosmic puzzle, back into its rightful socket at the very heart of the pedestal. The moment it clicked home, a wave of power, clean and invigorating, exploded from the Nexus. It did not shake the cavern, it stabilized it. It washed out through every vein of light across the globe, a healing tide that reached the deepest, most damaged roots of the world. The planet did not just heal. It thrums now with a renewed, powerful harmony, a song of wholeness that had not been heard for ages. And at the center of the chorus, stands a woman, once a geologist, who must now learn to conduct the music of the world itself. A new covenant was forged in the light of the restored Nexus. Elara and Kale, with the solemn blessing of the Geoliths, founded a new order, naming themselves the Wardens of the Vein. Their purpose was not to command the Lattice, but to serve as its guardians and translators, a permanent bridge between the Earth's song and humanity's restless expansion. The initial challenge was one of trust. They could not recruit with public proclamations. Instead, they sought out geologists who listened to the land with more than just instruments, ecologists who understood symbiosis as a spiritual truth, and engineers who dreamed of building in harmony with the ground, not just upon it. They looked for a rare balance, a curiosity tempered by reverence, knowing that a single ambitious recruit could unravel everything. Elara made a pivotal decision. Our headquarters cannot be a single place on any map, she declared. It must be a network, a living system as fluid as the energy we protect. She began teaching the first, carefully chosen wardens to sense the subtle pulses and pressure shifts within the Lattice, turning the planet itself into their private, secure communication grid. A whispered feeling of unease from a deep vein in one continent could be received as a gentle hum of confirmation from a warden on the other side of the world. True to his word, Dr. Eris became their most powerful, if unlikely, ally. Using his tarnished but still considerable influence, he funneled corporate and academic resources into black-budget environmental surveys and geological preservation trusts. He provided the wardens with a legitimate, invisible shield, his own guilt transformed into a steadfast commitment to protect the secret he had nearly destroyed. Their first major test came when blueprints for a new transcontinental railway were leaked to them by a sympathetic contact. The proposed route would have tunneled directly through a shallow, vital energy confluence. Instead of protesting, the wardens acted. Using Eris resources, they funded an alternative geological survey that discovered a rare, protected salamander species just off the original path. The public outcry was immediate, and the route was quietly shifted to a more stable, energetically neutral corridor. It was a perfect, silent victory. But as they celebrated their first success, a deeper truth settled upon them. For every threat they gently turned aside, they knew a dozen more were being drafted on drawing boards in cities that had never heard the Earth song. Their vigil was not a single mission with a clear end. It was a new, perpetual state of being, a quiet war fought with whispers and redirected intentions, a promise to stand guard over the planet's living light for all the days to come. The river did not flow like the others. Its current shimmered with a faint, internal gold, and the water felt warmer than the surrounding air. Lena, the hydrologist, crossed her arms, her expression a mask of professional doubt. She had been recruited for her brilliant work on watersheds, not for fairy tales about glowing rivers. Elara did not argue. She simply gestured to the water. "Place your hands in the current," she said softly, "and do not analyze, just listen." Lena's skepticism was a palpable force, but her scientific curiosity won. She knelt, her fingers breaking the surface. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then her breath caught, her eyes widened. It was not a voice, not a song she could name, but a feeling of profound, intricate connection. She felt the river not as a solitary body of water, but as a single thread in a vast, living tapestry, a thread that connected to the deep aquifers, to the mountain snowmelt, and to the very air itself. Her rigid posture softened, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek, washing away a lifetime of pure data in a single wave of belonging. Her conversion was a fragile victory. Each new recruit was a monumental risk, a person who had to be guided to the edge of their understanding without being pushed into fear or, worse, ambition. The teaching was agonizingly slow. Some, like Lena, grasped the connection instantly. Others only felt a vague warmth, a subtle hum they could easily dismiss. A single misstep, one candidate who saw the Lattice as a resource to be exploited rather than a spirit to be protected, could expose their entire fragile operation. To guide their growing numbers, Elara needed a new kind of map. She spread her old geological surveys across a stone table in the Nexus, the familiar contours of continents and fault lines, now superimposed with the brilliant, flowing pathways only she could fully perceive. With a stylus of pure light drawn from the air, she began to trace the true veins of light, creating the first living atlas of the planetary energy, Lattice. It was a fusion of her old science and her new sight, a guide that would allow other wardens to navigate the world's hidden flows. As the final golden line connected across a continental shelf, the map pulsed, revealing a terrifying new reality. 3 points on the chart flared with an urgent, crimson light. These were not just veins, they were nascent Nexus Points, embryonic hearts of the Lattice, so fragile and newly formed that their very existence was a secret. Their locations were a shock, one beneath a densely populated coastal city, another under a proposed deep-sea mining zone, and a third cradled within the permafrost of a rapidly melting tundra. The scale of their responsibility had just exploded. They were no longer just guarding the known world. They were now the midwives for the worlds yet to be born, protecting the most vulnerable places in a system that was still, impossibly, growing. The new Nexus Points glowed on her living atlas, 3 fragile stars pulsing with potential. But the deepest currents of the Earth's song called Elara away from the land, drawing her to the silent, crushing darkness of the ocean floor. She floated above a chasm where the veins of light converged into a brilliant, blue-white heart, a nexus of power that hummed a low, stabilizing chord for the entire Pacific basin. Her mind was extended, charting the intricate flows when she felt it. It was not a tremor of pain or a frantic plea. It was a whisper, a single, coherent thought, clear and ancient, woven into the fabric of the Lattice itself. Hello, the greeting was not in words, but in a wave of pure mathematical elegance and geological time, a consciousness that had been dreaming in the planet's molten core since the world was young. The revelation sent a shockwave through the assembled wardens back at their network hubs. The Lattice was not merely a circulatory system. It was a neural network, connected to an intelligence that predated life itself. Fear fractured their unity instantly. We are tampering with forces beyond our comprehension, one senior warden argued, his voice tight with alarm. This is a slumbering giant. To wake it is to risk everything we have built. How can we claim to be guardians if we fear the very soul of the world we guard? Elara countered, her own voice calm but resolute. This is not an invasion, it is an introduction. To ignore it would be the greatest arrogance. to assume our tiny chapter is the only story this planet has to tell. The debate raged, a tempest of fear and wonder, but the decision rested with her. With the weight of her order's future upon her, Elara made her choice. She did not send a complex message or a demand for answers. She quieted her own mind, becoming a single, clear note in the world's great symphony, and sent back a simple, peaceful pulse of acknowledgement. It was not a handshake, but a bow, an invitation to communicate on its own time, in its own way. For 3 days, there was only silence. Then, the response came. It was not a voice. It was a wave of pure, foundational knowledge that washed through the lattice and into the minds of every warden simultaneously. They saw the birth of stars in a clarity no telescope could ever achieve, understood the binding force of gravity as a gentle melody, and perceived time not as a river, but as a vast, still ocean. It was a gift, a library of the cosmos offered without condition. The gift was staggering, a key to mysteries that had plagued physicists for centuries. But as the immensity of the knowledge settled upon them, a new, chilling realization dawned. Such a profound transmission was a beacon. Their quiet dialogue with the heart of their own world had just announced their presence on a stage infinitely larger than Earth. The sky, once a ceiling, now felt like a window, and they had no idea who or what might be looking in. The silence that followed the cosmic download was not empty. It was filled with the humming awareness of an entire galaxy, a presence so vast it made the Earth song feel like a single note in an infinite symphony. The wardens stood frozen, their minds reeling. They had believed they were tending a garden, only to discover their garden was one petal on a flower whose stem reached across the stars. This was not just a new chapter in their mission. It was a rewrite of the entire book. The internal collapse was immediate and profound. Lena, the hydrologist, fell to her knees, her earlier wonder now crushed under the weight of cosmic scale. "What are we?" she whispered, her voice cracking, "if our entire world is just a single pebble on a beach that has no end?" Another warden, a stoic geologist named Ben, simply stared at his hands as if they had become useless. "Our purpose was a lie. We are not guardians. We are microbes on a speck of dust, pretending we matter." The fear was a contagion, threatening to unravel the delicate trust that bound their order. They had defined themselves as the planet's protectors, a role that now felt absurdly small and naive. Elara felt the terror too, a cold knot in her stomach. But as the panic washed through the group, she did something simple. She walked to the edge of the Nexus and placed her palm flat against the warm, living crystal. She focused not on the impossible expanse of the galaxy, but on the steady, familiar pulse beneath her hand. "This is not an ending," she said, her voice cutting through the despair. "It is a context. The love you feel for a single tree does not become meaningless when you learn of the forest. It becomes more precious. Our duty has not shrunk. It has been clarified. We are the stewards of this one precious node. We must prove we can care for our own home before we can ever hope to be good neighbors in a living cosmos." Her decision formed with the certainty of a law of physics. This ultimate secret, the Starlight Echo as they came to call it, could not be shared. The knowledge that the veins of light were galactic filaments, that their energy was a shared language across space, was too potent, too dangerous for humanity still struggling to see the life in its own soil. To reveal it would invite the same corrosive ambition that had driven Eris to steal the keystone, but on an interstellar scale. They would become not communicators, but conquerors, or worse, prey. A new, solemn covenant was made within the highest circle of wardens. They would become keepers of a hope for the far future, shepherds guiding their species toward a maturity it had not yet earned. Their work protecting the Lattice from dams and mines was now imbued with a profound new significance. Each saved vein, each healed nexus, was not just an act of planetary ecology. It was a qualifying exam for humanity's eventual place in a cosmic community. They were no longer just wardens of the vein. They were the silent gardeners, tending a single, brilliant seed in the dark soil, praying that one day it would grow tall enough to greet the starlight without being burned by it. The stone was cool and familiar beneath Elara's palm. Years had woven themselves into the granite since she first stood here, a geologist trembling with stolen proof. Now the pulse that answered her touch was strong and steady, a deep, resonant rhythm that spoke of health and wholeness. The air in the hidden sanctuary hummed with it, a quiet chorus underpinning the gentle rustle of lush ferns and the distant murmur of a clean, clear stream. Around her, the land was a testament to their long labor, a vibrant tapestry of green and gold where decay had once spread its gray fingers. A small group of new wardens moved through the grove, their hands skimming the energy flows with a dancer's grace, their focus a quiet prayer of respect. There were no crises today, no frantic races against collapsing fault lines. The tension here was different, a low, constant note of vigilance. Balance was not a trophy to be won and placed on a shelf. It was a conversation, a daily practice of listening and responding, a garden that required endless, gentle weeding. Elara watched the newest members, their faces alight with the same wonder she had once felt, and she understood her role had shifted once more. Today was not for fighting threats, but for planting the seeds of memory. She gathered them in a sun-dappled clearing, the original cave mouth, a silent witness behind them. She told them of the early struggles, not as epic myths, but as human stories. She spoke of her own fear and arrogance, of the terrible, beautiful cost of channeling the Nexus, and of Kael's unwavering patience. She shared the story of the cracked geolith, and how a single act of repair had built a bridge of trust where words had failed. These were not lessons in power, but in humility. Each story was a thread, carefully woven into the fabric of their understanding, ensuring that the legacy was not a set of rules, but a living spirit. With every young warden who learned to listen, the network grew stronger, its roots digging deeper into the consciousness of the world. The song of the earth felt unbroken, an eternal melody they were all learning to harmonize with, a promise that their quiet watch would echo long into the future. The sunset bled across the horizon in shades of molten gold and deep violet, a mirror to the quiet luminescence that now lived just beneath her skin. Elara watched the days end not as a spectator, but as a part of its unfolding, her own being a soft echo of the sky's grand display. She had journeyed from a woman who trusted only instruments to one who understood the silent language of stone and light, her transformation complete. No longer just a geologist or even a warden, she had become a living strand in the world's own tapestry, a guardian whose wisdom was etched not in degrees, but in the very energy that sustained all things. Below her feet, the veins of light flowed strong and clear, a secret humming harmony woven through the bedrock of the living earth. It was a truth known only to a scattered few, a promise passed in whispers and quiet songs from one chosen heart to the next. This was the legacy she had helped forge, not a fortress to be defended with weapons, but a rhythm to be maintained through reverence, a delicate balance upheld by those who had learned to truly listen. The work would never be finished, for the world was a living, breathing entity, always changing, always speaking. But as long as there were ears to hear its subtle music and hands gentle enough to guide its flows, the planet's great song would never be broken. Above her, the first stars pricked the darkening canvas of the sky, their cold, distant light a silent testament to connections that stretched far beyond the horizon she could see. They were a reminder that their vigil here was but one note in a cosmic symphony, a peaceful, perpetual watch under an infinite and whispering sky.
you.